So the Kim-Trump summit looks to be off for now. But where do the two sides go from here? Joining us in the studio to try and make sense of all this is Professor Song Se-ryun from Kyung Hee University. Professor, it's good to have you with us.
Here.
So much to talk about, but I guess we have to start from that letter that Trump wrote to Kim. It was a bizarre, some surreal letter. On one hand, sounding like a Dear John breakup letter expressing regret over pulling out of the summit, but on the other hand, they were still threatening nuclear annihilation. What do you make of this development? Why did Trump pull out of this summit?
Right. He pulled out of the June 12th Singapore meeting specifically, but the overall North Korea deal with the United States, that's something different. But if you look at it from the Trump's kind of actions so far, pulling out of something is nothing new. He pulled out of Paris Accord. He threatened to pull out NAFTA, Chorus Agreement, and NATO, and he did pull out the Iran deal as well. Yeah. Always seemingly looking for a better deal. So if it's a posturing, looking for a better deal, probably it fits within his negotiating style. But I think the worry is that there's something deeper than the mere posturing, which is that the denuclearization, the how and what, at this point, has not been clarified. So if it's really going to the substance of what the denuclearization means to both parties, probably it has not been clarified. So I think that both parties, especially in the Donald Trump side, might have thought that this is not the time to go ahead with meeting with the top meeting.
Right, but every expert and every commentator that I spoke to and I saw predicted that the Trump-Kim summit would happen, that it would go ahead despite the differences because Trump wanted it and so did North Korea. Was there any way we could have foreseen that this was going to be delayed or this was going to be cancelled like it was?
I think the indications over there, North Korea was not really cooperating with the logistics and also the terms to clarify what it means to be denuclearization and what's the benefit, economic benefit that the North Korea would be getting. Those things were up in the air, and I think the bigger part is that Donald Trump was being criticized by his constituencies that he is being dragged down by North Korea's initiatives on this. And the criticism was that he lost the big leverage by just, the promising for the security in the first place. So I think that he needs to kind of demonstrate that he does and is willing to pull out of this deal, and in fact the letter kind of clearly demonstrated that he wants to do so.
White House officials also revealed how difficult it's been trying to work with North Korea, how they didn't respond to calls and messages, and how there was even a report a few days ago that revealed a US delegation had gone to Singapore to meet with the North Korean delegation for a scheduled meeting, but they didn't turn up. They were stood up by the North Korean delegation. It's almost understandable that the US would be frustrated with these kinds of actions. Do you think Pyongyang perhaps misplayed their hand, playing hard to get, that cost them this opportunity?
I think it's puzzling, and I think I agree with you that somebody dropped the ball in the North. Either because of their deliberate posture to play hard to get, or because they overplay their hands, miscalculating that Donald Trump really wants this, and he wouldn't pull out of this because of the domestic woes that Trump has. But if you look at it from Art of Deal, even the book clearly says that you have to really secure the options and the downside, which is the biggest weapon of pulling out or walking out of the deal, and that's exactly what Donald Trump did.
There is some sentiment that says maybe pulling out of this deal was all for the best. Maybe cancelling this was all for the best. This whole endeavour was rushed in the first place. There was simply not enough time to narrow the differences. What do you make of that sentiment?
I think that sentiment is kind of justified because the whole premise of this deal going through, if you remember, is that they agreed on the denuclearization, not really realizing or scrutinizing what they mean by that term to each parties. I think the differences has been slowly crystallizing, and the people realize that the gap between the two parties' interpretation of that term is pretty much wide at this point. So in that sense, they needed more time to make that happen. I think that another factor is that if the North Korea really wants to keep the nuclear power to themselves, probably they would need more time to kind of let the whole world sink in that the North Korea is a nuclear power. I think that if they don't secure that, probably they would not go ahead with this, and they'll face all the sanctions and all those difficulties going ahead. But we have seen that the North Korea puts more emphasis or more importance on securing that side of it rather than the benefit to their people.
Let's look at North Korea's response now. North Korean state media carried a statement from Kim Kye-gwan, the regime's first vice foreign minister, and they expressed their shock. Let me quote here. They said, "It's hard to guess the reasons." But at the same time, it was also quite surprisingly restrained and soft in their wording, complimenting Trump for his boldness in trying to have a dialogue with North Korea and saying that they still want to sit down with the US. Compared to the previous day's rhetoric, it's quite a turnaround. Were you surprised at how Pyongyang has responded?
I think it's surprising. The initial response or the reaction is that it was surprising that they were restrained to that extent. But on the other hand, the North Korea met their match. They were using this brinkmanship and bluffing methods all along, and Donald Trump is a master at that too. So I think that both parties, especially the North, realize that by escalating the bluffing or the brinkmanship, this is not going to go anywhere. So they at least needed to put it on the table that they're willing and they're eager to get this thing done.
Now, almost pushed to the sidelines was the shutdown of the Punggye-ri nuclear test site. Footage came in early this morning, showing certain explosions of the certain entrances and certain buildings being blown up. Now, Pyongyang has voluntarily offered to take this action. US didn't ask for it. And they wanted to show that they were serious about their intent to denuclearize. But Trump has basically said with this cancellation of the summit that at least for now, then it doesn't mean that much. What does North Korea do now on this front? Do they carry on with their path to denuclearization?
Well, I think a lot of experts agree that this was a nice public relations kind of showing, but not much substance. The nuclear testing that they wanted to do is pretty much done. And if you look at the invitation that they have put out, no experts were invited, and no South Korean side either. And that test site facility has not been used for quite some time anyway. So it's nice to see that it's destroyed, but at this point, not much significance.
So both sides in their statement have left the door open for future talks. But do you think it can happen? Doesn't one side now have to concede a position of power to try and approach the other and ask for to reopen the talks? And can they ever really truly agree on the process of denuclearization?
Going back to whether what they are doing on both sides are posturing for the negotiation, it makes sense if you look at the big picture. Everybody wants this. North Korea wants this, US and Trump wants this, South Korea, of course, wants this. But the key, I think, is that because of their tactics of escalating and bluffing and trying to secure all kinds of leverages on both sides, the uncertainties have increased so much. And also, ever since China has pulled into this whole picture, the complexity has gone up also. So even if everybody wants this, this might not happen if not enough efforts go in to massage or rectify all those bumps and bruises. I think because of that, the willingness and the effort from the North and the US, and especially from South Korean government, might really make the difference.
Let's talk about South Korea's government at this point. South Korean President Moon Jae-in, you've got a feel for him. It must be difficult for him right now because he was the one who instigated, who really pushed for this summit to happen, for this dialogue to happen. Where does President Moon go from here now? Does he try to involve himself again?
Well, ironically, though, the President Moon Jae-in's role is arguably bigger than ever. Ever since the date was set and the venue was set, there was a sort of a consensus that South Korean government's role has been diminished to a point where it's a crisis of the existence or the visibility. But at this point, if South Korean government or the President Moon Jae-in does not step in, probably this thing might not happen because both parties, North Korea and the U.S., is so busy trying to establish their leverages and trying to see that they acquire a good position in the negotiation. So, ironically, again, the Moon Jae-in's role at this point probably is very crucial.
Do you think he now picks up the phone, that special hotline that they've recently installed, to Kim Jong-un to try and talk to him at that point?
At this point, the detail is the matter. He can take that route or wait for the things to cool down on both sides and use kind of the beneath the surface kind of approaches to both parties. And I think it depends on the style of President Moon Jae-in, who has used all kinds of different peace gestures and kind of personal charm and the humane approach, humanistic approach to make this happen. So I think that all eyes are on what the President Moon does or not do going forward.
And briefly, just before we go, one point I do want to mention as well. President Trump, in his address yesterday, when he was talking about the cancellation, the first thing he talked about was U.S. forces were ready to take on North Korea if necessary. Now, the U.S. Defense Department has also reiterated these comments today. How concerned should we be of military action again now?
Well, we're concerned because whenever there's a threat of the fury and fire, speeches from any side will increase the likelihood that the next military action take place. But from Trump administration's side, this military option, at least, is a very important leverage in the negotiation, so they're not going to let go. Hiring Bolton on his side as a hawkish component, I think it represents the thinking that there is always a bad cop on this side, so this will keep the North Korea in check. Knowing North Korea's the history is of escalating and the bluffing and all those things, I don't know if this will make sense or make things worse, but I think that kind of rhetoric will foreseeably continue.
I feel there's so much more to talk about, but I think we'll have to end it there. Thank you for your time again, Professor, and it was always good to see you here.
My pleasure.